must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky. And all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. And the wheels kick and the wind's song and the white sails shaking.
This was the most adventurous sailing on Earth, the Whitbread Round the World race. Racing yachts through mountainous seas and grand watery canyons in unforgiving sub-zero chills, with lurking danger beneath the waves at every turn, where the exhilaration of the fast surfing ride can quickly turn to numbing survival if something goes wrong. From the sweltering heat in the equatorial Atlantic to below freezing in the most unpredictable waters on the globe, the Southern Ocean. The climatic extremes place enormous stresses on crews and boats.
Of all the ocean races that I've covered as a journalist, or even taken part in myself, there's one outstanding, and it has to be the 1989-90 Whitbread and the match race between Steinlager 2 and Fisher and Paykel, between Peter Blake and Grant Dalton. There was none to match it.
Grant Dalton and Peter Blake stood as arch rivals from the beginning. From a country renowned for its passion for sailing, these two men split their nation's loyalties down the middle.
Peter Blake was a fairly laid-back character who knew exactly where he was going and what he wanted to achieve, but he did it in a most relaxed manner. Grant Dalton, on the other hand, was an intense, fiery beast who really set down aggressively to dictate what he was going to do. And the two of them, well, they were just like chalk and cheese.
Before his untimely death in 2001, Sir Peter Blake was one of the world's favourite sons of ocean racing and adventure. Since he was a young boy, Peter had dreamed of racing big yachts around the world.
Really, I got to know him better when he joined the crew of Burton Cutter in 1973 for the first Whitbread Round the World race. I met him down below on that boat where he was building his own bunk, because that was what you had to do. You were given some strip timber and plywood and told to build your bunk where you wanted it, virtually. And that was only 3 or 4 days before the race started.
His charismatic personality captured the hearts and minds of all who sailed with him. Brad Butterworth was Peter Blake's tactician in '89, now managing the sailing team for the Swiss defence of the 2007 America's Cup. He recalls from his base in Geneva the man he so admired.
I learned a lot about seamanship from him. You know, he'd be the best guy I've ever sailed with in the ocean. You know, we were young sailors trying to carve a career out of the sport, and he was really the first fully blown professional sailor that had come from the European environment.
The younger Grant Dalton was a multi-talented sportsman with a natural desire to succeed. He was afraid of no one.
I think that if any challenge is put in front of Grant Dalton will accept it. He would come good with whatever challenge was put in front of him, and the more challenges that were put in front of him, the more he accepted.
As a young man, he saw Peter Blake arrive in Auckland aboard the British yacht Heath's Condor in the second Whitbread Round the World race in 1977.
And I'd read all the articles as the boat was arriving, you know, about the icebergs and the albatross and the Southern Ocean, and Pete was on that boat. So I knew of him through that. I mean, really, that was where my love of the Round the World race was kindled. But I didn't meet him physically until I applied for what became Seramco in about 1980, which was his first Round the World boat of his own.
It could be said their rivalry was born that year. Dalton was shocked to learn that Blake didn't want him on his crew.
He probably didn't think I was right for the job, otherwise I guess I would have got selected. I was devastated. And the funny thing is, you know, what do they say? If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And that was one of the number of incidences through my life which made me stronger.
Determined to prove he was worthy, he joined the crew of the Dutch boat Flyer, which went on to win the race. Although 10 years younger, Dalton aspired to the heights Blake had achieved on the international sailing scene. Humility was not an outstanding feature of his personality.
Well, respect grows, and I guess, you know, back then I didn't have a lot of respect for anybody much. My job was to get the job done and win, and it's certainly grown now, all these years on, but back then, you know, Blake or anybody would just, somebody had to knock over.
4 years later, Blake wasn't so quick to dismiss him. Dalton became Blake's watch leader aboard the 1985 Whitbread Challenger Lion New Zealand, which was no match for the far-designed winner, UBS Switzerland, skippered by Pierre Fellman. Dalton had made up his mind while sailing with Blake to pursue his own campaign for the next race in 1989. Blake had announced he was going again, so Grant was effectively giving Blake notice he wasn't going to have his country's supporters, sponsors, and the best designer to himself. Dalton was first into Farr's office with the concept of a two-masted ketch.
Well, I remember the meeting like yesterday, and I said, you know, what about a ketch? Now, I think they'd thought of it. You know, in fact, I think they've probably even done a little bit of work on it, but they play this game about, you know, if you don't ask for it, you don't get it. That's how one of the ways they separate each of the clients.
Peter came in later on and asked what we thought about ketches, and we essentially gave him the same answers we'd given Grant, with it. We weren't sure this was the right way to go, but we would be happy to investigate it.
Rumours spread to Europe that the Kiwis had something special.
You got to remember, in the first place, that nobody knew that either of them was going to have a ketch. The whole of the previous race had been won by a sloop, and everybody thought that that might be the way to continue.
On their arrival in England, the big question was, how would they perform against the single-masted sloops? The potential battle between the ketches for the Whitbread Round the World race became apparent when Blake and Dalton took first and second places in the notorious Fastnet Classic just weeks before the start.
The Fastnet was a wonderful test, 605-mile rehearsal for the big race. Two boats were outstanding. Steinlager and Fisher and Paykel battled each other all the way round the course. They were never out of sight of one another, and they only finished 2.5 minutes apart. What could you expect from that? Well, it was something we all knew what we were going to expect. We were going to have one hell of a race in the Whitbread Round the World.
I think that we realised that they were our main opposition, and we certainly we spent a lot of time trying to make sure our performance would be better than theirs, because we could see if we bet Fisher and Paykel would probably win the race.
The scene was now set, but there was 33,000 miles through 5 oceans in 9 months before a result.
The race is not just about speed, it's about durability, the crew, the food, the stores you have on board, your backup. What happens after leg 4? Do you have enough sails to carry you to leg 5? Are they new? Have you used them before? As all your campaign falling apart? Is the boat falling apart? Are the crew all fed up? Lots of other factors. It's not just boat speed. The race is very different to that.
You going to win it?
Wait and see.
And this is where it all began on that September Saturday in 1989. It was the start of a match race that nobody is ever likely to forget. The boats came out of the Solent like a cavalry charge, making their way out towards the narrows here between Hurstcastle.
Well, I can remember going out of the Solent pretty clearly in '89, and they beat us out Even though we were second out, all that proved is what we already knew, that the ketches were going to clean up everybody else.
Been sailing now about 15 hours, 16 hours, and it's pretty tight. The Steinlager just down here, we've made very fast time, averaging probably close to 13 knots since the start. A bit behind us is Rothmans, and then further out to leeward of Steinlager is Merritt, and we're sailing in about 30 to 35 knots, making around about 14 to 15 knots at this present point in time.
Barometer is dropping slightly, which is a good sign. There's a great big high pressure system in the West English Channel. We're now aiming down here, and on the corner here there are probably 4, 6 to 8 winds from the east or northeast, which should start at the Portuguese trades, and these winds whistle down the Portuguese coast if you're lucky, and it means you get could get quite a fast ride. So the first boat down here, I think, will get a leap on the rest.
The first leg to South America identified the fastest yachts in the fleet, and for what lay ahead in the Southern Ocean, it was an ideal shakedown for the crews. In a bold move on day 4, Blake made a calculated decision to break away from the fleet.
There was a bit of a corridor of wind at a certain time, and we wound up jibing. Rodmans actually came past us quite close on the other jibe, and that was the last we saw of anybody.
It really just showed the lack of research and the lack of preparation by a lot of our competitors. Why didn't they go there? They didn't use racing tactics. They didn't decide who was the opposition and keep near the opposition. They decided to go their own way. And it cost them, boom, out the door.
The doldrums conjure up stories of old sailors consumed with madness from the heat and apparent hopelessness from drifting in the windless calms for weeks. It's the convergence zone, where north meets south, where the tropical winds drop and crews wait for the southern trade winds to carry them on to Uruguay. Eventually, the wind returned. At first, a gentle breeze, but rapidly growing in strength as the southeast trade wind settled in. Grant Dalton's attempt to claw back the big lead Blake had at this point was shattered close to the coast of Brazil.
Basically what happened was we were running downwind doing about 18 knots with a spinnaker up and a gennaker on the back mast, and the backstay holding the mast up, the fitting at the top of the mast let go, and the spreaders tried to support the mast but they couldn't, and then the whole lot came down around the deck, and within an hour and a half we had the whole mess cleaned up to basically the state it's in now.
While his crew escaped injury, others weren't so lucky. Constant reminders that handling these boats can be extremely hazardous. Steinlager 2 sailed into Punta del Este unscathed, half a day ahead of their nearest rival.
Other than the first hard running in the beginning of the league, had been quite a benign sort of league in terms of breeze, not a lot of wind, and we'd sort of cruise down there, and for me I thought, God, what's it all about? It's not that hard. We got into Punta del Este and we were pretty excited that we had such a big lead and that we felt pretty confident.
Peter got a good break on the first leg and got a big jump on the rest of the fleet, and that to some degree sealed the race for him, made it extremely difficult for someone else to challenge him.
A wounded Fisher and Paykel limped into port, confronted with major repairs and building a new strategy to get back into the race.
Well, we've got a new mast already waiting for us in Heathrow, and it'll be flowing down here. We'll assemble it and we'll be sailing again at full strength within 10 days.
Has this cost you the race?
No, absolutely not. No, not at all.
Behind the media hype and the excitement of the arrival of the rest of the fleet, Grant was under immense pressure.
For me, Punta was a hell time. We had no mizzen rig, we had big crew problems. Bring another navigator in, change the crew around, follow your instinct to try and get it right, and it did come right, frankly, after that. But these were big decisions for guy my age with his first campaign.
He was not alone with his stress. Despite the relative tranquility of this beautiful port, the Russian skipper Alexei Grushenko took his own life. From the beginning, it was as if he was carrying the hopes and dreams of his entire nation, a burden he ultimately couldn't live with.
It was a bit of a shock when we saw him, the footage of him hanging from a tree, knowing that, you know, those guys, they barely made the race. They've been struggling all the way through. And it was pretty sad. There was a lot of long faces that day, that's for sure.
With the land-based dramas behind them, the cold reality of the next leg refocused the crews. This was the Everest of ocean challenges, the second leg to Fremantle, Western Australia. 7,650 miles and 3 to 4 weeks of racing on the edge of survival.
The next leg is the hard one. It's really the hard one, and we know that. I think everybody knows that. There will be a lot of damage in the next leg. There'll be boats 1,000 miles behind, not 300 miles behind, and we have to get our brains together, pull ourselves up by the bootlaces and really do a job on the next leg.
Oh, I think it will be far and away the hardest, probably the hardest there has been, with such a long distance to go, you know, nearly 8,000 miles, and in very cold conditions, because we're dropping south very early in the season, so the ice is very far north at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be pretty tough. A lot of wind, and people driving their boats probably as they haven't driven them before. Maybe we had a good blast in the Atlantic, but now it's going to go on day after day after day.
Just as Blake made a defining navigational decision in the Atlantic, Dalton made his move, heading south that forged Fisher and Paykel into a commanding lead.
We jumped down quite early into the Southern Ocean and climbed onto a front coming through, which helped us. You know, we were the first to pioneer that fast dive. That was a good Fisher and Paykel tough-ass leg, that one.
Wonderful sailing, wonderful reaching conditions down there where the boats are going flat out, but it also can be too fast because the winds can get up to 50, 60 knots down there, and that makes it very, very difficult indeed. You can soon broach out in there, and broaching in those conditions, putting the boat flat on its side, is not something you want to do when there's big seas like that about.
The mind's a great thing, and it tends to block out the bad times, and there's certainly a lot of those when you're miserable and sitting on the rail and wonder why the hell you said you'd do it in the first place.
Don't have more than 3.5 hours sleep ever. Very, very cold. Snow on the decks probably for a couple of weeks, snow and ice and slush.
It's grey, it's cold, it snows. You're paying attention, you're worried, because if you go in the water, you know, you get a strong chance of not being picked up again. At night, especially, I don't think they'll ever get you.
In the very cold conditions, people's minds slow right down, and you can feel you're not pushing the boat hard enough, or you can feel there's a change you should be doing, and you don't do it because, oh, well, you just can't sort of be bothered. It's a strange feeling, and it doesn't get any better until you start getting back into the warmer conditions.
On November the 12th, the Daily Radio Report announced the news everyone dreaded.
2 men went overboard from Crichton's Naturally into the icy waters of the Southern Ocean. Both men were recovered back on board, but regrettably, one of them, Anthony Phillips, was unable to be resuscitated and died.
The Southern Ocean's a pretty dangerous place. You go down there at your peril, really. Some days the waves can be incredibly big. They dwarf the boat, and you know there's container loads of water falling on top of the boat. You know, if you're not clipped on, it's easy to get swept over the side. You're pushing the boat 24 hours a day. It's extreme. No matter what footage you get of it, it doesn't really show how extreme it can be down there.
That was a physically demanding leg, and it was a leg, you know, where that attitude of drive the snot out of this thing started to work for us. I mean, we were bearing Steinlager. I think at one stage we were 300 miles ahead of them, and I've always remembered that as just grunt. We just grunted out a 300-mile lead.
Defending his lead, Dalton made a fatal error in his choice of when to climb out of the Southern Ocean. He sailed to the north of the Kerguelen Islands. Steinlager's crew saw more wind to the south.
We were really pushing hard at that stage, and so we were taking miles off him. He was going to lighter wind, and we kept in more breeze around the bottom. The sloops were right with us at that stage as well. There was any one of probably 4 boats that could have won that leg.
It all came down to the last day and a half when they were coming up from the southern Indian Ocean, and it was in that bit that the whole thing turned on its face, and Steinlager 2 got ahead. They got a wonderful battle for second place between Rothmans and Merritt. Fisher and Peikel had to be content with 4th place, having led for most of the leg.
We led, I think, up until the last night, and they just waltzed on by in the light air, pretty much straight alongside and gone.
I think we managed to sail the boat quite well, 24 hours a day through that light stuff, and, you know, out of all the legs, that was the toughest and the most enjoyable to win.
I was disappointed with the end result of that, but not as... I wasn't suicidal like I was at the end of the first leg when the whole bloody thing wasn't working properly. We started pretty heavily focusing on the run to Auckland, you know. Coming home to Auckland was always going to be a big push.
Blake was a master of gamesmanship and preyed on his opposition psychologically. To beat Fisher and Peikel on this leg was all that mattered.
People are psyched out. That's great from our point of view, and the more we can psych them, the better it's going to be. That's what this race is all about. It's not just the speed on the water. It's about getting into people's minds on the other boats in port of call and be seen to be ready early in the piece and be seen to be relaxed and have no crew changes, no crew bothers. It's all part of making them feel uncomfortable, and that's great.
Blake's experience paid off, putting Dalton under enormous pressure. But as always, Grant accepted the challenge and reacted with even greater determination. Fremantle to Auckland was 3,434 miles. 800 miles from land, both ketches entered into the most spectacular fight for the lead ever witnessed in open ocean.
They were pushing each other harder and harder and doing things that people simply hadn't done before in terms of driving their boats to the limit.
We were reaching hard along the Australian Bight, and one boat would catch a wave and reach over the top of the other. It would reach right up behind them.
Well, they came hurtling down a wave, but he pulled the bow away and dived to leeward as they surfed in on the wave. And probably, you know, 20 feet. It wasn't far. We were very, very close.
The boats were too close together, which was crazy, and then common sense prevailed and we sort of split up a bit. Daltz actually took off a bit. He went lower. I think he set a chute and managed to get ahead of us.
The fleet sailed across the bottom of Australia and up into confused seas of the Tasman in the aftermath of the storm. The beam on sea and wind made for exhilarating high-speed racing as Dalton and Blake's private duel continued, right through Christmas Day. On January the 2nd, one of the French entries, Charles Jourdan, came out the worst after an encounter with a whale.
We hit a whale and we have a big hole in the hull, and for the moment all is well on board and we stay in race.
Nearing the coast of New Zealand, once again a dying breeze threatened Fisher and Paykel's lead.
The high pressure sits in the Tasman. It's fairly normal in the summer, so you got to cross it to get to the top of New Zealand. And we were well ahead. God, we were well ahead. 18 miles, it's a lifetime when you're nearly home. You know, we just sat there parked for a day and a half. By the time we got to the top of New Zealand, they'd caught us. In fact, they'd passed us. And so, you know, the ding-dong started from that point down the coast, and that was a good ding-dong, that bugger.
The race was on a knife edge. Fisher and Paykel and Steinlager swapped the lead countless times across the top of New Zealand, just 250 miles from the finish.
We're beating up around Reinga in a moderate breeze, having a good tussle. There's 4 boats very, very close with Steinlager, ourselves, Merritt and Rothmans all clearly inside of each other, and at the moment it's just a tactical battle to try and get up round the corner where we'll be able to square away and start heading for Auckland.
The wind from the north pushed the leaders toward their home port and straight into the pages of the history books.
The public around here remember mainly about the 89-90 round the world race. They remember what happened about out here about 20 miles away. We're very close to Steinlager. I'm talking 200 metres here, okay? And the boats are basically the same speed. We've duelled all night, we've been ahead, we've been behind. We've got ahead and we blew a damn spinnaker that we didn't have a spare for, which was probably the main reason we lost the leg.
There was a southerly change came through and we only just managed to get it ourselves, knowing that this change was coming. Daltz didn't have that information and he wound up, you know, sort of sailing with a chute straight into it.
They knew what was coming. Blakey called the dousing of the spinnaker right at the last minute and got a Genoa up and away they went.
It's stooped in legend, but frankly the legend's absolute bullshit, so I'll tell you the truth. As we turned to squirt down to hoist the headsail, we broached. It happens. So the boat lay over, the spinnaker blew out and went in the water and blah, blah. But the legend is that they saw it and we did, and we're a complete pack of wankers and they're really clever. Well, it's absolute crap. But the legend still lives.
That was the end of that leg, really, where the pressure went off and we sailed into Auckland Harbour, and, you know, what a feeling.
Peter Blake crossed the line a mere 6 minutes ahead of Grant Dalton, making it 3 legs and 3 wins after racing halfway round the world.
The guys behind us, you know, they deserve just as much, though. What a battle inside of each other for 3,500 miles.
I just remember the cheering when we knew that, you know, Steinlager was the boat that really had done it. It was obviously so important to the boys on board Steinlager that, you know, this is their home port. They had to do it. And obviously exactly the same for Grant and his team on Fisher and Paykel. So very knife edge, very exciting, but a huge relief when it was over.
Probably that was the most important leg to any of the Kiwis to finish there first. I'm sure it grates Daltz to this day, but you know, it was a great race, and you know, it was close right to the end, and we managed to pip him at the finish, which was great.
Steinlager was a brilliant campaign. I've always said that. He got a bit jammy with a few of the decisions they made, but it was a brilliant campaign. And the New Zealand public were enjoying pitching the 2 campaigns against each other. If you track the 3 legs before, we'd had a shocker in the first leg. We'd almost had a really good one in the second leg, and this had been a fight to the wire.
The next leg took the fleet back into the freezing Southern Ocean, around Cape Horn and back up to Punta del Este in Uruguay, a distance of over 6,000 miles. The city of sails turned on a perfect day to farewell their heroes. It appeared as if the entire population of Auckland was afloat, causing massive congestion at the starting area.
And you just get thousands of boats, you know. It'll never be like that again.
We were really worried about hitting somebody. It was so congested, it was crazy.
Was it ever? Boy, there was some grief in that start. And, you know, the hometown heroes, Steinlager and Fisher and Paykel got nice starts, but the drama of that start was the card.
Yeah, I really did feel for Magnus Olsson, who was steering the card at the time. Something had to give, and it was the mizzen mast of the card. Well, they cut it adrift, and they got their shore crew to recover it fairly smartly, and so it was able to be rebuilt for them, but they had to sail that leg as a sloop.
Once clear of land, the mighty Kiwi ketches powered up again and showed their sterns to the chasing fleet.
We've been at sea now for 24 hours, and it's been a good 24 hours for us, particularly after the mayhem of the start. At the moment we're leading, been going quite nicely. We've got about 15 knots. A beautiful clear sky. We've got Steinlager off to starboard and Merritt behind. We've gone quite nicely. The boat's feeling really good, and I think at the moment it might be just pulling away a little bit.
Heading south away from civilization, the yachts were again at the mercy of the remote wilderness of the Southern Ocean. In a crisis, they would have only their wits and each other to rely on. Rothmans was put to the test early on.
It was just reaching along and in about 35 knots, and they just broke straight in half. It took us 36 hours to fix. But once we repaired it, it hasn't really slowed us down.
Rukana Sport wasn't so lucky. They returned to New Zealand to repair a broken rudder after hitting a whale.
There's a lot more, I think, in the water than you realise, and so, you know, they used to come alongside, and Peter used to have these marine books where he'd search out. I used to be hoping that the thing would go away, but, you know, he'd be looking to see what sort of whale it was and identify it.
You'd be somewhere at a party, and Peter would gravitate towards the children or the animals. They were his, he had a sort of natural ability to get on with I mean, he loved animals.
One day, one of them came right alongside the boat and stuck with us for hours, and must have thought that the big red looked pretty good looking to it, I don't know, but anyway, it was amazing. He could have stepped off onto it. I think the guys that do the race come out of it with a hell of a respect for nature.
Now, Blakey stayed quite well north. We went south, and, you know, we were in the Penguins, and they had these bloody Hawaii shirts on. Although it's slightly further to sail, it was actually a better route, and it wasn't really until we got to the Horn that we got back together again.
Below the 50th latitude, the air temperature is seldom above zero, and there's a constant danger of ice.
We're at 60 degrees south, about the bottom of our run across the Southern Ocean. We won't go much lower than this. We wouldn't want to, because it'll be too cold and we might run into the pack ice. And we've seen a lot of icebergs. In fact, there's one out on my port beam now, and there's always one at sight at any one time.
They can be just like huge islands. But then you sail past the berg and you settle down and relaxed, and an hour later, you know, you're 10, 12, 15 miles along, and suddenly all the bits that are broken off that berg start appearing up in the water. And if there's a bit of a swell running, they disappear under the waves. No radar's going to pick them up, no instrumentation will pick them up at all, and so you just cross your fingers and keep going.
Everybody reckons, of course, they go away at night and then they come back during the day. Or at least that's the way they seem to treat it, because people still are driving their boats just as hard at night, and the bergy bits are there.
Last night we came very, very close to a berg, and as we were about to jibe the boat, we encountered a bergy bit or growler right in front of the boat. It was about the size of a house, and it would have opened the boat up like a can.
We managed to have not a bad run down to Cape Horn. You do go a long way south, and it is you know, it's treacherous. You're in the Southern Ocean. I think it's not a place you'd go there by choice. Well, I wouldn't.
Approaching the notorious Cape Horn, the weather and seas were uncharacteristically calm. The records show 4 men have been swept to their deaths into these icy waters since the race started in 1973.
It is the place which is instilled in every sailor, the most dangerous place in the world. It's the sailor's most feared landmark. Many an old sailing ship is at the bottom, just south of Cape Horn. And of course, on this particular race, Blakey had an extra crewman on board from one of those sailing ships.
We called him Dusty Chapman, but I can't remember his first name, but he was an old square rigger sailor. And he had been cremated, and his family wanted his ashes sprinkled around Cape Horn as we went round it.
When Peter was a young child, he spent a lot of time reading books about the sea. I mean, people like Joshua Slocum were his heroes. To him, it was the Southern Ocean and the hard racing across oceans. I mean, he wasn't a round the boys racer at all, and it was icebergs and albatross and combating the elements, and he was truly passionate about the sea.
Actually, there was a big debate when the ceremony should happen, because Daltz was quite close to us, and we were having a bit of an argument when we should do this, but Peter did the ceremony.
We were back in the game at that stage in '89. It was Steinlager, you know, we were really close. You know, you just about talked to each other, running down through the Straits of De La Mer before we went up through into the Falkland area. So, chance to win the league here. Let's get it on, you know.
Daltz actually brought in a great breeze right at the end there, and we thought we were like 9 miles ahead of him, and in reality he was right there. That morning it was quite a surprise to see him, you know. Everybody paid attention from there on up to Punta del Este.
The weather and sea continued calm as the fleet turned north towards the Falkland Islands, making it all the more dramatic when disaster struck one of the yachts.
In quite moderate conditions, the yacht Martella OF, a Finnish boat, lost its keel. The radio operator had managed to get a mayday call out with a position. The boat rolled over and the entire crew were parked on the bottom of the boat awaiting rescue.
Although Merritt was in a strong position in 3rd place, behind Steinlager 2 and Fisher and Peichel, Fellman and his crew abandoned the race to go to the rescue. It was a gallant decision, and one made in the best traditions of seamanship. They were joined by Charles Jourdan.
Suddenly we heard a crash, and the boat started to heel over. It took about less than 10 seconds before it was 90 degrees, and then another 5 to 10 seconds when it was 180 degrees upside down.
We were damn near in port by that stage. No, they were a long way behind. I mean, of course, had we been asked to go to the rescue from anywhere, of course we would have. But Steinlager and Fisher and Peichel together were a long way gone, thousands of miles away by that stage.
We're about 140 miles now from Punta del Este, and the pace has really cracked on. We're averaging nearly 16 knots, and it's going to be a very, very fast finish.
They pushed their boat. You know, they really showed how professional they were in terms of pushing their boat to the end. You know, it's one of the longer legs, and so we were happy to get it over and out of the way.
Big Red had won the last of the Southern Ocean battles, arriving unscathed in Punta del Este, only 21 minutes ahead of Fisher and Peichel.
We'd raced each other hard now. We're back in Punta, and we'd started racing each other hard in Punta 4 months previously. And there was a mutual respect between the teams at that stage. We'd started, they'd opened up a big lead on the whole race, but we had also started to establish ourselves, you know, in terms of second place in the race.
They used to say that the Whitbread was won or lost in the Southern Ocean. Now, with the crucial and harshest legs behind them, the crews of both yachts were ready to release some pent-up tension.
It wasn't a long walk to the rat house on the end of the jetty where they berthed, and my goodness, they didn't have to make a mess of themselves in there. But then they were entitled to. They'd been through the Southern Ocean, they'd been round Cape Horn, and they were back in the land of warmth and a certain amount of civilization in Punta del Este.
Alcohol's a wonderful thing. And I remember I was sitting downstairs and there was this almighty thump as Blake catapulted completely, I think he missed the stairs completely, down into the floorboards downstairs. I was just sitting in the sails. And he catapulted himself down into the sails as he fell legless, because his legs had stopped working at that stage, inside our boat. So that kind of melted everything away. I remember it really clearly. I was probably just as pissed as him, actually, but I still remember it.
I think that Peter Blake was pretty confident by that time that Steinlager 2 had a lead that was unassailable. And I think that by that time, yes, you can afford to be a bit generous in in winning.
What can you do? You know, you can just keep doing your best. That was all we could do. You know, we were down in speed in the light. We were good in speed in a breeze. You know, so unless we get a big breeze, they're probably going to beat us, you know, unless they break. Hey, they nearly bloody broke too. They nearly lost the whole damn lot in that last leg, you know.
The next leg took the yachts onwards to Fort Lauderdale in Florida for the final stop before the last leg across the Atlantic to the finish in England. The weather stayed fine as the fleet sailed back up the coast of South America, across the equator and into the fabled waters of the Caribbean. After the desolate loneliness of the Southern Ocean, the sea suddenly came alive. There's a legendary belief by men of the sea that dolphins are reincarnated sailors who have returned to the sea to dance in the wakes of ships and watch over and care for their fellow mariners. Their presence would have been some comfort to the family and friends of those lost during this race.
Funny, I don't have a lot of memory of that leg. You know, it's real hot. It's further than you think, but it seems to go quite quickly, that leg.
There was an opportunity for Fisher and Paykel to go out on a limb a bit, and certainly they did, and they got quite a long way ahead at one stage. But Blakey was playing the midline course, and in the end, of course, he had a slightly faster boat in the lighter conditions, and the lighter conditions that came in the Caribbean were much more to his advantage than they were to Grant's. By playing the thing straight down the middle, Blakey got all the answers right in the end.
Blake was such a competent seaman, you know, but he would always be erring, saying, look, you guys, you know, we have to be careful here, there's more wind coming or whatever. And so, you know, really showing the experience he had and, you know, the quality that he had of being, you know, a phenomenal seaman.
After 5,500 miles, the two New Zealand boats are only 12 miles apart, and that shows how close the racing has become. And it's been a very hot most.
You knew there was something in Peter Blake right from the start. The charisma that man held was very different from most of the others around him. He was perhaps one of the greatest yachtsmen that's ever sailed the ocean.
Incredibly, once again there was only 34 minutes between Steinlager 2 and Fisher and Paykel. But despite winning every leg, Blake was still not ready to celebrate victory.
It's like a racing car driver. You might lose all your oil on the last lap and that's the end of you. So we'll play the next leg just the same as we played the others, conservatively, but making sure we don't break anything. And, you know, we finish third or fourth or fifth, a few hours behind everyone else, we don't mind.
As history now shows, Peter Blake did win the final leg, but only after a harsh reminder of how 30,000 miles of wear and tear on his boat could almost have sunk his overall victory.
Steinlager 2 was only saved by a magnificent piece of seamanship by Brad Butterworth, who was steering at the time.
They were bloody lucky in that last leg not to lose the mizzen. I mean, the chain plate broke, the mast nearly went over the side and didn't. Now, you got probably a one out of two chance of that. The next time they did it, it'll go over the side.
It really shocked Peter. You know, after that he was really depressed about the fact that we could blow this whole race because, you know, and he'd done the race so many times.
It was his 5th try at winning the Whitbread Round the World race, and he did it in such a complete manner by winning every one of the 6 legs of the course. Well, that's a whitewash.
It was a great race and I think a great struggle between two good crews. They pushed us in every leg and, you know, I think we just had a little quicker boat and managed to be able to pip them on each leg, which was phenomenal, really.
It was a win that had never been done before at that level. Just a superbly done job, and that really showed. And I think that set up Peter for all his future exploits.
In 1995, Peter Blake led his nation's successful challenge for the America's Cup and its defence 5 years later, before taking up a new life as an environmental advocate.
But for Peter Blake and Steinlager 2 being there, that would have been Grant Dalton's race. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. I think he was a bit unlucky. Fancy facing Blakey with a really top boat and a top crew. Well, you know.
We were both in Southampton water together, for Christ's sake. Well, you can swim down Southampton water, it's not that far. Again, very, very close ending. But the correct ending too. You know, there was a world between those 2 campaigns, you know. So even though it was 25 minutes, that was a world, because they were a better campaign in every area, frankly.
Grant Dalton won the next Whitbread 4 years later. Today, he heads New Zealand's challenge to wrestle the America's Cup back from the Swiss, stepping, as it were, into Peter Blake's shoes and pitting himself against another of his old rivals, Brad Butterworth.
We were young in those days and we had long careers ahead of us, and, you know, it was big. Everybody was, because you're ready to finish that race. It's a long way around, and everybody had had enough, and, you know, they were all happy to finish that and enjoy the moment.
I was in Australia. I had just come home in the evening when I got the message, and my instant reaction was one of disbelief.
I mean, to this day, it sends a shiver up my spine, you know, because actually a friend of mine in the States called me, and he rang me in the middle of the night and said that Pete had been shot.
Pete's death is one of those ones where you know exactly where you were. I can tell you exactly. I was standing, not sitting, standing when the phone rang, and Maria Ryan rang me, friend of the family's, and said, Pete's been shot. I remember exactly where I was.
In September 2001, on a Blake Expeditions voyage to the Amazon, Peter Blake was tragically shot and killed by pirates.
It's tough to see a guy that you've been with a lot of your professional career, and he's a good friend, to be gunned down for so cheaply, and, you know, by some animal in South America.
I'm a journalist. I have a newspaper to service, and that newspaper needed, from me, it needed an obituary for Peter and a report for the sports pages on the man I knew, the man I loved and trusted, and who I knew I was going to miss.
I remember being affected more than I would think that I would have been. There's just a void that is created when someone great is killed or dies, that you can't really paint as a, you know, like you lose your mother or you lose a very close friend. That's a very personal loss. This was a loss not just for the community of sailing and for New Zealand as a whole, that you feel that something has been taken.
The tragedy of Peter's death was that I think he was just beginning something which I think really could have become really quite big. And because of all his years sailing around oceans and because of his love of wildlife, he'd become very aware of what was happening and felt this quite inherent urge to go out there and be committed towards the environment and show people what a great place the world is and how, you know, not to spoil it, to take care of it.
I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind's song and the white sails shaking and a grey mist on the sea's face and a grey dawn breaking.